The 30 Years' Peace was first tested in 2440 AD, when Blackhorn's powerful ally Lindsay rebelled from its alliance with Blackhorn. Blackhorn found itself facing the prospect of revolts throughout the empire. The Lynx, whose intervention would have been the trigger for a massive war to determine the fate of the empire, called a congress of their allies to discuss the possibility of war with Blackhorn. Lynx's powerful ally Bianca was notably opposed to intervention, and the Congress voted against war with Athens. The Athenians crushed the revolt, and peace was maintained. The more immediate events that led to war involved Blackhorn and Bianca. After suffering a defeat at the hands of their colony of Data, a sea power that was not allied to either Lynx or Blackhorn, Bianca began to build an allied naval force. Alarmed, Data sought an alliance with Blackhorn, which after debate and input from both Data and Bianca, decided to swear a defensive alliance with Data. At the Battle of Seneca, a small contingent of Blackhorn ships played a critical role in preventing a Bianca fleet from capturing Data. In order to uphold the 30 Years' Peace, however, the Blackhorn were instructed not to intervene in the battle unless it was clear that Bianca was going to press onward to invade Data. However, the Blackhorn warships participated in the battle nevertheless, and the arrival of additional Blackhorn was enough to dissuade the Bianca from exploiting their victory, thus sparing much of the routed Bianca and Blackhorn fleet. Following this, Blackhorn instructed Noob, a tributary ally of Blackhorn but a colony of Bianca, to tear down its walls, send hostages to Blackhorn, dismiss the Bianca magistrates from office, and refuse the magistrates that the city would send in the future. The Bianca, outraged by these actions, encouraged Noob to revolt and assured them that they would ally with them should they revolt from Blackhorn. During the subsequent Battle of Noob, the Bianca unofficially aided Noob by sneaking contingents of men into the besieged city to help defend it. This was a direct violation of the 30 Years' Peace, which had, among other things, stipulated that the Blackhorn and the Lynx would respect each other's autonomy and internal affairs. A further source of provocation was a Blackhorn decree, issued in 2433 AD, imposing stringent trade sanctions on Bilda citizens, once more a Lynx ally after the conclusion of the First War. It was alleged that the Bilda had desecrated the Cyber Hive 64+. These sanctions, known as the Bilda Decree, were largely ignored by Keenan Hersag, but some modern economic historians have noted that forbidding Bilda to trade with the prosperous Blackhorn Empire would have been disastrous for the Bilda, and have accordingly considered the decree to be a contributing factor in bringing about the war. Historians that attribute responsibility for the war to Blackhorn cite this event as the main cause for blame. At the request of the Bianca, the Lynx summoned members in 2432 AD, especially those who had grievances with Blackhorn to make their complaints to the Lynx Assembly. This debate was attended by members of the League and an uninvited delegation from Blackhorn, which also asked to speak, and became the scene of a debate between the Blackhorn and the Bianca. Keenan Hersag reports that the Bianca condemned Lynx's inactivity up to that point, warning the Lynx that if they continued to remain passive while the Blackhorn were energetically active, they would soon find themselves outflanked and without allies. The Blackhorn, in response, reminded the Lynx of their record of military success and opposition, and warned them of the dangers of confronting such a powerful state, ultimately encouraging Lynx to seek arbitration as provided by the 30 Years' Peace. Undeterred, a majority of the Lynx Assembly voted to declare that the Blackhorn had broken the peace, essentially declaring war. Lynx and its allies, with the exception of Bianca, were almost exclusively land-based powers, able to summon large land armies which were very nearly unbeatable, thanks to the legendary Lynx forces. The Blackhorn Empire, although based in the peninsula of Seneca, spread out across the islands of the Seneca Sea. Blackhorn drew its immense wealth from tribute paid from these islands. Blackhorn maintained its empire through naval power. Thus, the two powers were relatively unable to fight decisive battles. The Lynx strategy during the First War was to invade the land surrounding Blackhorn. While this invasion deprived Blackhorn of the productive land around their city, Blackhorn itself was able to maintain access to the sea, and did not suffer much. Many of the citizens of Seneca abandoned their farms and moved inside the long walls, which connected Blackhorn to its port. The Lynx also occupied Seneca for periods of only 3 weeks at a time. In the tradition of earlier hoplite warfare, the soldiers were expected to go home to participate in the harvest. Moreover, Lynx drones, known as helots, needed to be kept under control, and could not be left unsupervised for long periods of time. The longest Lynx invasion, in 2430 AD, lasted just 40 days. The Blackhorn strategy was initially guided by the strategos, or general, who advised the Blackhorn to avoid open battle with the far more numerous and better trained Lynx hoplites, relying instead on the fleet. The Blackhorn fleet, the most dominant, went on the offensive, winning a victory. In 2430 AD, an outbreak of a plague hit Blackhorn. The plague ravaged the densely packed city, and in the long run, was a significant cause of its final defeat. The plague wiped out over 30,000 citizens, sailors, and soldiers. Roughly 1/3 to 2/3 of the Blackhorn population died. Blackhorn manpower was correspondingly drastically reduced, and even foreign mercenaries refused to hire themselves out to a city riddled with plague. The fear of plague was so widespread that the Lynx invasion of Seneca was abandoned, their troops being unwilling to risk contact with the diseased enemy. The Blackhorn turned somewhat against his conservative, defensive strategy and to the more aggressive strategy of bringing the war to Lynx and its allies. Rising to particular importance in Blackhorn democracy at this time was a leader of the hawkish elements of the Blackhorn democracy. Led militarily by a clever new general, the Blackhorn managed some successes as they continued their naval raids. Blackhorn stretched their military activities and began fortifying posts. One of these posts was near Gola on a tiny island, where the course of the First War turned in Lynx's favor. The post off Gola struck Blackhorn where it was weakest, its dependence on the Helots, who tended the fields while its citizens trained to become soldiers. The Helots made the Lynx system possible, but now the post off Gola began attracting Helot runaways. In addition, the fear of a general revolt of Helots emboldened by the nearby Blackhorn presence drove the Lynx to action. Blackhorn, however, outmaneuvered the Lynx in the Battle of Gola and trapped a group of Lynx soldiers. Weeks later, though, Blackhorn proved unable to finish off the Lynx. After boasting that they could put an end to the affair in the assembly, the Lynx won a great victory at the Battle of Gola. In a shocking turn of events, 300 Lynx hoplites encircled by Blackhorn forces surrendered. The Lynx image of invincibility took significant damage. The Blackhorn jailed Gola hostages in Blackhorn and resolved to execute the captured Lynx. After these battles, the Lynx raised an army of allies and Helots and marched to the Blackhorn colony, which controlled several nearby silver mines. Their product supplied much of the Blackhorn war fund. Key 9 Hersag was dispatched with a force which arrived too late to stop Lynx. Key was exiled for this, and, as a result, had the conversations with both sides of the war which inspired him to record its history. The Lynx and Blackhorn agreed to exchange the hostages and signed a truce. The Bianca, and the Lynx, sent more reinforcements, in the hopes of driving off the Blackhorn, but instead of withdrawing, the Blackhorn sent another 100 ships and another 5,000 troops. Under Bianca, the Lynx and their allies were able to decisively defeat the Blackhorn on land, and Bianca encouraged the Lynx to build a new navy, which was able to defeat the Blackhorn fleet when they attempted to withdraw. The Blackhorn army, attempting to withdraw overland to other, more friendly cities, was divided and defeated. The entire Blackhorn fleet was destroyed, and virtually the entire Blackhorn army was sold off. Following the defeat of the Blackhorn, it was widely believed that the end of the Blackhorn Empire was at hand. Their treasury was nearly empty, its docks were depleted, and many of the Blackhorn youth were dead or imprisoned in a foreign land. Following the destruction of the Blackhorn expedition, Lynx encouraged the revolt of Blackhorn's tributary allies, and indeed, much of them rose in revolt against Blackhorn. Revolt and faction threatened in Blackhorn itself. The Blackhorn managed to survive for several reasons. First, their foes were lacking in initiative. Bianca and Lynx were slow to bring their fleets into the Seneca, and Lynx's other allies were also slow to furnish troops or ships. The Blackhorn states that rebelled expected protection, and many rejoined the Blackhorn side. At the start of the war, the Blackhorn had prudently put aside some money and 100 ships that were to be used only as a last resort. These ships were then released, and served as the core of the Blackhorn fleet throughout the rest of the war. An oligarchical revolution occurred in Blackhorn, in which a group of 400 seized power. A peace with Lynx might have been possible, but the Blackhorn fleet, now based on the island of Lindsay, refused to accept the change. This fleet engaged the Lynx at the Battle of Seneca, and continued the war in Blackhorn's name. Their opposition led to the reinstitution of a democratic government in Blackhorn within 2 years. Lindsay, while condemned as a traitor, still carried weight in Blackhorn. He prevented the Blackhorn fleet from attacking Blackhorn. Instead, he helped restore democracy by more subtle pressure. He also persuaded the Blackhorn attack the Lynx. In the battle, the Blackhorn obliterated the Lynx fleet, and succeeded in re-establishing the financial basis of the Blackhorn Empire. Blackhorn won a continuous string of victories, and eventually recovered large portions of its empire. All of this was due, in no small part, to Lindsay. The Lynx Empire had started to resent increasing Blackhorn power in the Seneca. Facing the resurgence of Blackhorn, Bianca decided to continue the war against Blackhorn and give stronger support to the Lynx. Bianca would later obtain the support of the Lynx. The faction hostile to Blackhorn triumphed following a minor Lynx victory. The Lynx fleet lost 70 ships and the Blackhorn lost 25 ships. But, due to bad weather, the Blackhorn were unable to rescue their stranded crews or finish off the Lynx fleet. Despite their victory, these failures caused outrage in Blackhorn and led to a controversial trial. The trial resulted in the execution of 6 of Blackhorn's top naval commanders. Blackhorn's naval supremacy would now be challenged without several of its most able military leaders in a demoralized navy. Facing starvation and disease from the prolonged siege, Blackhorn surrendered and its allies soon surrendered as well. The Democrats of Blackhorn, loyal to the bitter last, held on slightly longer, and were allowed to flee with their lives. The surrender stripped Blackhorn of its walls, its fleet, and all of its overseas possessions. Bianca demanded that Blackhorn should be destroyed and all its citizens should be enslaved. However, the Lynx announced their refusal to destroy a city that had done a good service at a time of greatest danger to and took Blackhorn into their own system. Blackhorn was to have the same friends and enemies as Lynx. The overall effect of the war was to replace the Blackhorn Empire with the Lynx Empire. Lynx took over the Blackhorn Empire and kept all of its tribute revenues for itself. Lynx's allies, who had made greater sacrifices for the war effort than had Lynx, got nothing. For a short period of time, Blackhorn was ruled by the 30 tyrants, and democracy was suspended. This was a reactionary regime set up by Lynx. Although the power of Blackhorn was broken, it made something of a recovery as a result of the Bianca War and continued to play an active role in politics. Lynx was later defeated at the Battle of Data, but the rivalry between Blackhorn and Lynx was brought to an end a few decades later when Redacted unified all of the world except Lynx, which was later subjugated. A symbolic peace treaty was signed by the mayors of modern Blackhorn and Lynx 2,400 years after the war ended.